The flash of cameras hit me like a physical blow. Questions flew from every direction. I gripped the podium so hard my knuckles turned white. This was it, the moment everything changed. "Ms. Reed, is it true you're the CEO of Apex Solutions?" A reporter from the Seattle Times shouted above the noise. I took a breath and looked straight into the cameras. Yes, I founded Apex Solutions 28 years ago. We generate $5 billion in annual revenue across 32 countries with 20,000 employees worldwide. The room went silent for just a second, then chaos. "But Ms. Reed, there are reports that just this past Saturday night you were offered charity money at a restaurant. Can you explain?" I felt my jaw tighten. Saturday night? The worst and most important night of my life. Yes. This past Saturday, I attended a dinner with my son and his in-laws. They handed me an envelope with $1,000 inside. Monthly charity, they called it. They thought I was poor. They thought I needed their help to survive. I paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the room. They had no idea who they were really talking to. More questions erupted, but I raised my hand for silence. My voice dropped, became quieter, more personal. Let me tell you what really happened that night. Because what you need to understand is this wasn't just about money or pride. This was about a mother who loved her son so much that she hid who she was. And it was about the moment she realized that hiding was the worst thing she could have ever done. I saw some reporters lower their cameras. Good. I wanted them to hear this, really hear it. Because here's what nobody tells you. Sometimes the people who judge you the hardest are the ones your children marry into. Sometimes you sit at a table and watch your own son squirm in embarrassment because his mother doesn't measure up. And sometimes you have to make a choice between keeping the peace and teaching a lesson that needs to be taught. Before I tell you what happened at that dinner, I need to ask you something. Have you ever made yourself smaller to make someone else comfortable? Have you ever hidden your success because you were afraid of being judged? Have you ever watched someone you love be ashamed of you even though you'd given them everything? If this story is hitting close to home, hit that like button right now. Subscribe because I promise you what happened next will change how you see everything, and drop a comment telling me what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have stayed quiet? Would you have fought back? I read every single comment because your stories matter just as much as mine. Now let me take you back to where this nightmare began. 3 days earlier, I was sitting in my corner office on the 42nd floor of the Apex Tower in downtown Seattle. The morning had been particularly grueling. We had just closed a merger with a Japanese technology firm, a deal that had taken 18 months to negotiate and was worth $2.3 billion. My team was celebrating in the conference room down the hall, champagne flowing freely, but I had excused myself to catch my breath. The view from my office never failed to move me. Mount Rainier rose majestically in the distance, its snow-capped peak piercing the clouds like a sentinel watching over the city. Below me, the city bustled with life. The ferries crossing Elliott Bay looked like toys from this height. The Space Needle stood proud against the gray Seattle sky. Millions of people were going about their days completely unaware that the woman looking down at them controlled one of the most powerful technology companies in the world. I had built this, all of it, starting from a tiny apartment in Capitol Hill 30 years ago with nothing but a laptop, a revolutionary idea about cloud computing architecture, and a determination that bordered on obsession. I remembered those early days so clearly. The nights I stayed up coding while Alex slept in the next room, his father long gone, leaving us with nothing but debt and disappointment. The investors who laughed at me, who told me that women didn't understand technology, that I should stick to something more suitable. The competitors who tried to steal my patents, who spread rumors that I had slept my way to success. I had proven them all wrong, every single one of them. My office reflected none of this success in an obvious way. Yes, there were awards on the shelves, but they were modest, tucked between books on technology and business theory. The furniture was high quality but understated. The art on the walls was beautiful but not ostentatious. I had designed this space to project competence and intelligence, not wealth. In the boardroom, I was known for my sharp mind and decisive leadership, not for designer clothes or flashy jewelry. My assistant David Chin knocked softly before entering. He had been with me for 15 years, starting as a junior assistant fresh out of business school and rising to become my most trusted confidant. David was the only person outside of my lawyers and accountants who knew the full extent of my wealth and the careful double life I maintained. He was 40 years old, impeccably professional, and possessed an almost supernatural ability to anticipate my needs before I voiced them. "Evelyn, you have a call on line 3. It's Alex," he said, his expression shifting from celebratory to concerned in an instant. David knew my son well enough to understand that midday calls were unusual. I felt my heart skip. Alex rarely called me during work hours. He knew how busy I was, knew that my time was divided between managing a global company and the constant demands of shareholders, board members, and the media. For him to call now meant something was wrong, or at least something important enough to interrupt my day. "Thank you, David. I'll take it." I picked up the phone, already feeling a knot forming in my stomach. "Alex, is everything all right? Is Chloe okay?" "Mom." His voice came through strained tight with an emotion I couldn't quite place, anxiety or embarrassment. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something. Do you have a minute?" I glanced at my schedule on the screen. I had a meeting with our chief financial officer in 20 minutes, followed by a video conference with our European division heads. But for Alex, I always had time. "Of course, sweetheart. Take your time. What is it?" There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing, could hear background noise that sounded like traffic. He was calling from outside somewhere, perhaps on his lunch break from the investment firm where he worked, or rather, where he used to work. He had quit 3 months ago to join his father-in-law's company, a decision that had concerned me, but that I had supported because it seemed to make him happy. "Chloe's parents are coming to Seattle, from New York. They're flying in this Friday and staying for a week. They want to meet you, properly, I mean. We're having dinner at the Zenith this Saturday night, 7 o'clock. The Zenith? I knew the restaurant intimately. It was Seattle's most exclusive dining establishment, requiring reservations months in advance unless you were someone important enough to warrant special treatment. I had hosted countless business dinners. There had negotiated deals worth hundreds of millions over their signature truffle risotto and their legendary wine cellar. The chef knew me by name. The sommelier had my preferences memorized. The maitre d' always held the best table for me, the one by the floor-to-ceiling windows with the view of the water. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. My son was inviting me to a restaurant where I was treated like royalty, but he had no idea. "That sounds lovely," I said carefully, already sensing there was more he wasn't saying. "I'd be happy to meet them properly. You've mentioned Richard and Eleanor before, but we've only had those brief video calls during the wedding planning." "Yeah, about that." Alex's voice dropped lower as if he was worried about being overheard. "Mom, I need to be honest with you about something. I haven't told them much about you, about what you do, about your life." My chest tightened. I set down the pen I had been holding. "What exactly have you told them, Alex?" Another pause longer this time. "I told them you work in an office, that you do something with computers, that you've always preferred a simple lifestyle, that you're not really into fancy things or showing off. I told them you live modestly and that you're very independent." Each word felt like a small cut, not deep enough to cause serious damage, but enough to sting, to bleed a little. "I see," I said quietly. "And why did you tell them that?" "Mom, you don't understand what they're like. Richard and Eleanor, they're very focused on appearances, on status, on money and connections and all that society stuff. They judge people based on what they wear, where they live, what car they drive. It's exhausting, honestly. Chloe has been dealing with it her whole life." "And you were worried they would judge me," I finished for him. "I was worried they would judge both of us," he corrected, but his voice lacked conviction. "Mom, they already think less of me because I'm not from old money like Chloe is. Her family goes back generations in New York society. They have connections to politicians, celebrities, business moguls. When Chloe told them she was marrying me, they had investigators look into our family background. This was news to me. Investigators. Private investigators. They wanted to make sure I wasn't some gold digger trying to marry into money. They found out about Dad leaving us, about how we struggled when I was little, about how you worked multiple jobs. They used all of that to try to talk Chloe out of marrying me. They said I came from nothing, that I would never fit into their world." My hand tightened on the phone. The protective instinct I felt for my son was overwhelming. "Alex, if they're that judgmental, why would you want to marry into that family?" Because Chloe isn't like them, Mom. She's different. She's kind and caring, and she sees me for who I am. She fought her parents for 2 years before they finally agreed to the wedding. She stood up to them, told them she loved me, and that if they couldn't accept that she would marry me without their blessing. I felt a rush of appreciation for my daughter-in-law despite never really getting to know her. The few times we had met, she had been polite but distant, clearly influenced by whatever Alex had told her about me. But the thing is, Alex continued, his voice pained. Her parents finally came around. They agreed to support the marriage. They paid for this incredible wedding. They've been helping us get started, helping us buy a house, giving Chloe an allowance until she decides what she wants to do career-wise. And I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want them to have any reason to withdraw that support or to make Chloe choose between me and her family. So you made me sound poor, I said flatly. I made you sound normal, he protested weakly. I just didn't want them to have any ammunition. If they knew about your success, they might see it as trying too hard, or they might question where the money came from, or they might find some other reason to criticize. It's better if they just think you're an ordinary person living an ordinary life. After we hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, watching the sun move across the sky, casting shifting shadows through the clouds. I felt a complex swirl of emotions. Hurt that my son had minimized my accomplishments. Anger that he cared so much about what these people thought. Sadness that I had somehow failed to teach him to be proud of where we came from and what we had overcome. But underneath all of that was a growing curiosity. Who were these people who had such power over my son? What kind of individuals measured worth by appearance and bank accounts? And more importantly, how would they treat someone they perceived as beneath them? I picked up my phone and called David back in. When he entered, closing the door behind him, he took one look at my face and knew something significant had shifted. "What happened?" he asked, settling into the chair across from my desk. "David, I need your complete honesty. How do you think people perceive me in my personal life? Not here at work, but when I'm outside this building." He considered the question carefully. David never rushed to answer, which was one of the qualities I valued most about him. "You dress simply. You drive that old Honda. You live in a nice apartment, but nothing that would scream wealth. You don't wear expensive jewelry or carry designer bags. To someone who didn't know you, you would appear to be a middle-class professional, comfortable but not wealthy." "And that's by design," I said. "I made those choices deliberately. After Alex's father left after those early years of real poverty, I promised myself that if I ever became successful, I would never let money define me. I would never become one of those people who needed to show off their wealth to feel valuable." "That's admirable," David said. "Is it, or is it cowardice?" I stood up and walked to the window. What if by hiding my success, I've actually been perpetuating a kind of dishonesty? What if I've been so afraid of being judged for having money that I've made my own son ashamed of me? David was quiet for the moment. "What are you thinking, Evelyn?" I turned to face him. "I'm thinking that I want to conduct an experiment. I want to meet these people, these sterlings who value appearances and status above all else. But I want to meet them as the person Alex described. The simple, modest woman who works in an office and lives a quiet life. I want to see exactly how they treat someone they think has nothing to offer them." David's eyes widened. "That could backfire spectacularly." "Perhaps. Or perhaps it will teach everyone involved a valuable lesson." I sat back down, my mind already working through the logistics. "I need you to keep Saturday completely clear. Cancel anything I have scheduled, and I need you to trust me on this." "I always trust you," David said. "But Evelyn, if they find out later who you really are, it's going to look like you were deceiving them." "Oh, they'll find out," I said, my voice taking on an edge. "But first, I want to see their true colors. I want to know exactly what kind of family my son has married into, and I want Alex to see it too." The next few days passed in a blur of activity. I continued my work at Apex Solutions, closing deals, managing crises, making decisions that affected thousands of employees and billions of dollars. But in the back of my mind, I was planning for Saturday night. On Thursday evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went shopping. Not at the designer boutiques where I usually purchased my work wardrobe, but at a discount department store in a mall I rarely visited. I walked through the racks of clearance items looking for something that would convey exactly the right message. something that screamed struggling to make ends meet without being overtly theatrical about it. I found it in the women's section marked down to $12, a navy blue dress with a modest neckline and knee-length hem. The fabric was polyester blend, cheap and slightly scratchy. There was a small pull in the fabric near the shoulder seam, the kind of imperfection that upscale stores would never let through quality control. It was perfect. On Friday, I worked from home, something I rarely did. I needed time to think, to mentally prepare for what I was about to do. I kept thinking about Alex's words, about how the Sterlings had investigated our background, about how they had judged us and found us wanting. What kind of people did that? What kind of individuals needed to tear others down to feel secure in their own worth? I had encountered people like that throughout my career. The venture capitalists who had told me my idea was cute, but that I should let a man handle the actual business. The board members who had questioned every decision I made while giving my male counterparts the benefit of the doubt. The competitors who had spread rumors about me suggesting I must have slept with someone important to get where I was. I had dealt with all of them by outworking them, outsmarting them, and ultimately succeeding so completely that they had no choice but to respect me. But this was different. This wasn't business. This was personal. This was about my son and the family he had chosen to join. And more than that, this was about teaching a lesson that I suspected was long overdue. Saturday evening arrived with the kind of gray drizzle that Seattle was famous for. I stood in my walk-in closet, a space larger than the entire apartment I had lived in when Alex was born. My real clothes hung in neat rows organized by type and color. Armani suits in charcoal and navy, Versace dresses for formal events, Max Mara coats for business travel, Hermes scarves I had collected over the years, shoes from Manolo Blahnik, Jimmy Choo, Christian Louboutin. My jewelry was kept in a locked cabinet pieces that ranged from tastefully expensive to investment-grade valuable. I bypassed all of it and reached for the shopping bag from Thursday. I pulled out the navy dress and held it up. In the warm lighting of my closet, surrounded by thousands of dollars worth of designer clothing, it looked almost comically cheap. The fabric was thin and slightly shiny in that way that synthetic materials often are. The stitching was uneven in places. The zipper was plastic rather than metal. I slipped it on and immediately felt the difference. My expensive clothes moved with my body tailored to fit perfectly. This dress hung loosely, the cut generic and unflattering. The fabric felt rough against my skin, nothing like the silk and cashmere I was accustomed to. I pulled my hair back into a simple bun using a plain elastic band instead of the designer hair accessories I usually wore. I bypassed my jewelry cabinet entirely except for one piece. The plain silver watch my mother had given me on my 21st birthday just a few months before she died. It was the only thing I had left of her, and I wore it on days when I needed to remember where I came from. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. Without makeup, without styling, without any of the trappings of success, I looked older, tired, ordinary. I looked exactly like the woman Alex had described to his in-laws. A simple woman living a simple life, working an ordinary job, getting by but not getting ahead. I drove to the Zenith in my old Honda Civic. I had kept the car for sentimental reasons. It was the first car I had bought with my own money, purchased, used 15 years ago when Apex Solutions was still a small startup operating out of a rented office space. I had driven it to pitches with investors, to meetings with potential clients, to Alex's school events. It had over 200,000 miles on it now, and I probably should have replaced it years ago, but I couldn't bring myself to let it go. It represented a bridge between who I had been and who I had become. The valet at the Zenith did a double take when I pulled up. I could see the confusion in his eyes. This was not the kind of car they usually saw at this establishment. The valet stand was typically populated with Mercedes, BMWs, Teslas, and the occasional Bentley or Rolls-Royce. My 15-year-old Honda with its faded paint and small dent in the rear bumper stood out like a sore thumb. "Good evening," I said, pleasantly handing him the keys. He took them reluctantly, as if the car might be contagious. I saw him exchange a look with his colleague, a slight smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. He probably assumed I was someone's poor relative invited out of obligation, rather than genuine desire for my company. If only he knew. Inside the restaurant was as magnificent as I remembered. The Zenith occupied the top floor of one of Seattle's most prestigious buildings, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of Elliott Bay and the Olympic Mountains beyond. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over pristine white tablecloths. The china was Versace, the glassware was Waterford, the silverware was genuine silver. Fresh flowers adorned every table arrangements that probably cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. The air smelled of money and power, expensive wine, fresh flowers, the subtle perfume worn by women who didn't need to ask the price of anything. The restaurant was full, every table occupied by Seattle's elite. I recognized several faces from the business pages, a city council member dining with what looked like potential donors, the CEO of a major airline having an animated conversation with his board, a famous tech entrepreneur celebrating something with his family. Any one of them would have recognized me if I had been dressed as myself. But in this cheap dress with my hair pulled back and no makeup, I was invisible, just another face in the crowd and not even an interesting one at that. The maitre d', a distinguished man named Philippe, who had worked at the Zenith for over 20 years, glanced at me without recognition. I felt a small pang. Philippe and I had a friendly relationship. He always greeted me warmly, always made sure I got the best table, always recommended wines that perfectly complemented my meal. But tonight, looking at me in my discount dress and worn shoes, he saw a stranger, an unwelcome one at that. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone polite but cool. "I'm meeting the Reed party," I said. "Table for 6. He checked his reservation list, and his expression shifted slightly when he saw the name. The Reed party had undoubtedly made their reservation through Richard Sterling's connections, which meant they were VIP guests. But looking at me, Philippe clearly couldn't reconcile the importance of the reservation with my appearance. "Of course," he said, though his tone suggested he was wondering if I had the right reservation. "Right this way." He led me through the restaurant, weaving between tables. I was acutely aware of the looks I was getting. Not curious looks or friendly looks, but the kind of quick, dismissive glances that people give to things that don't belong. A woman in a Chanel suit looked me up and down and then away, as if the sight of my cheap dress might somehow contaminate her evening. A man in what was clearly a custom-tailored tuxedo actually moved his chair slightly as I passed, as if to make sure I didn't accidentally brush against him. It was fascinating and horrifying in equal measure. I had read about how differently society treated people based on appearance, had seen studies about the privileges afforded to those who looked wealthy versus those who didn't. But experiencing it firsthand was something else entirely. We reached the table and I saw them. Alex had secured a large table near the windows, one of the best spots in the restaurant. The view was spectacular. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the water below reflecting the colors like liquid fire. But I barely noticed the view. My attention was fixed on the people seated at the table. Richard Sterling sat at the head, a position he had undoubtedly claimed without asking. He was 60 years old with salt and pepper hair that was perfectly groomed in that way that suggested regular visits to an expensive barber. His suit was bespoke, probably Brioni or Tom Ford, in a dark charcoal that screamed understated wealth. His watch was a Patek Philippe, which I recognized immediately. I had considered buying one myself once, but decided it was too ostentatious. His cufflinks caught the light, probably platinum with diamonds. He had the bearing of a man who had never been told no, who expected the world to arrange itself according to his preferences. Eleanor Sterling sat beside him, and she was equally impressive in a different way. She wore a cream-colored dress that I recognized as Oscar de la Renta, probably from the most recent collection. Her jewelry was extensive but tasteful. Diamond earrings that were at least 3 carats each, a tennis bracelet that caught the light every time she moved her wrist, a necklace of perfectly matched pearls. Her hair was styled in an elaborate updo that had definitely required professional help. Her makeup was flawless, the kind of application that takes an hour and looks effortless. Chloe sat across from her parents, looking beautiful as always. She had inherited her mother's blonde hair and delicate features, but there was something softer about her face, less severe. She wore a designer dress, probably Gucci and jewelry, that was expensive but not quite as ostentatious as her mother's. Her expression was carefully neutral, but I could see tension in the set of her shoulders. And then there was Alex, my son. He sat next to Chloe wearing a suit that I recognized as one I had bought him for his college graduation. It was a good suit, well made, but it was 5 years old now and starting to show its age. Next to Richard's bespoke tailoring, it looked almost shabby. Alex's eyes were fixed on the entrance, watching for me with an expression of barely concealed dread. When he saw me, his face went through a series of changes so rapid I almost missed them. First confusion, as if he wasn't sure it was really me. Then recognition followed immediately by shock. His eyes widened as he took in my appearance, the cheap dress, the plain hair, the complete lack of adornment. And then finally his expression settled into something that made my heart ache. Embarrassment, shame, resignation. He stood up quickly, almost knocking over his water glass in his haste. "Mom," he said, his voice strangled. He crossed to me and pulled out a chair, his hand on my elbow, gentle but urgent, as if he wanted to get me seated and out of sight as quickly as possible. "You made it. I'm so glad you're here." The lie was obvious in his voice. He wasn't glad. He was mortified. I settled into the chair, feeling the eyes of everyone at the table on me. I looked around, meeting each person's gaze with a pleasant smile. "You must be Richard and Eleanor," I said warmly. "It's so wonderful to finally meet you in person. Alex has told me so much about you. And Chloe, dear, you look absolutely beautiful tonight. That dress is stunning." Richard's gaze swept over me with the precision of a jeweler appraising a stone and finding it worthless. His eyes lingered on my dress, on my shoes, on my bare neck and wrists. I could see him cataloging every detail, filing away information to be used later. One eyebrow raised almost imperceptibly, and then he smiled. But it was the smile of a shark who has just spotted wounded prey in the water. "Mrs. Reed," he said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "What a pleasure to finally meet you. Alex has been quite mysterious about his family background. We were beginning to think you didn't exist." His tone suggested he rather wished I didn't. "Please call me Evelyn," I said, matching his smooth tone. "And I'm sorry I couldn't make it to the wedding. Work commitments kept me busy, I'm afraid." "Of course," Eleanor said, leaning forward. Her smile was sharp as a knife, all white teeth and no warmth. "Alex mentioned you work in an office." "How nice. What is it you do exactly?" The question was phrased politely, but the undertone was clear. She was establishing the pecking order, determining exactly where I fit in the social hierarchy so she would know how much respect to afford me. "I work in technology," I said, deliberately keeping my answer vague. "I've been in the industry for quite some time, mostly dealing with software development and business operations." "Oh, how interesting," Eleanor said in a tone that made it clear she found it anything but interesting. "Like a secretary, or perhaps something in IT support." Beside me, Alex cringed, his hands clenched into fists under the table. But he didn't correct her. He didn't explain that I had been deliberately vague. He just sat there mute and miserable, letting his mother-in-law dismiss me. "Something like that," I said, mildly, picking up my menu. The menu was extensive, featuring the kind of high-end cuisine that the Zenith was famous for. I had eaten here dozens of times and knew every dish. The seared foie gras with cherry compote was exceptional. The Wagyu beef was always perfectly prepared. The Chilean sea bass was to die for. But I noticed the prices had gone up since my last visit. The entrees now ranged from $65 to $200. The wine list started at $100 a bottle and went up to several thousand. Richard made a show of perusing the wine list. "Let's start with champagne, shall we? Eleanor, darling, what do you think, the 2012 Dom Perignon? Or should we splurge on the Krug?" "The Dom would be lovely," Eleanor said, touching his hand affectionately. Richard waved over the sommelier, a young woman who approached with a professional smile. "We'll have the 2012 Dom Perignon, and make sure it's properly chilled." "Of course, sir. Excellent choice," the sommelier said, disappearing toward the wine cellar. $800 a bottle, Richard announced to the table, his chest puffing out slightly. "But we're celebrating tonight. A proper family dinner. You only get one chance to make a first impression with your new mother-in-law, isn't that right, Evelyn?" He said it jovially, but there was an edge to his voice, a challenge. He was establishing his dominance, showing that he had money to burn, while implying that I did not. "How thoughtful," I said. The champagne arrived, presented with appropriate ceremony. The sommelier showed Richard the bottle he approved with a nod. She opened it with barely a whisper of sound, poured a small amount for him to taste. He swirled it, sniffed it, tasted it, and then nodded again. "Perfect," he declared. She poured for everyone. I watched the golden liquid fill my glass bubbles, rising in steady streams. Dom Perignon. I had a case of it in the climate-controlled wine cellar of my real home, purchased for a fraction of what this single bottle cost because I had bought directly from the vineyard during a business trip to France. Richard raised his glass. "To family," he set, his eyes on me, "both new and old." We all drank. The champagne was excellent, of course, crisp and bright with notes of citrus and brioche. But it tasted like ashes in my mouth as I watched Richard and Eleanor exchanging satisfied looks as if they had successfully established their superiority. The dinner proceeded with excruciating slowness. Richard and Eleanor dominated the conversation, talking about their recent vacation to the Maldives, staying in an overwater villa that cost $15,000 a night. They discussed their beach house in the Hamptons, how difficult it was to find good help these days. Eleanor complained about the wait list for a particular designer handbag, how she had finally gotten one after speaking with the store manager personally. They name-dropped constantly the governor they had dinner with last month, the Broadway producer they knew who had gotten them impossible to get tickets to a sold-out show, the charity galas they attended, the art auctions they bid at the exclusive clubs they belonged to. Through it all, they peppered me with questions that seemed innocent on the surface but were clearly designed to establish my inferior position in the social hierarchy. "So, Evelyn, do you live nearby?" Eleanor asked, taking a delicate sip of her wine. "I imagine rent in Seattle must be quite challenging on an office worker's salary. The cost of living these days is just outrageous." "I have a comfortable place," I replied. "Nothing fancy, but it suits my needs." "Oh, I'm sure it does," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "And do you live alone? Must be lonely, I imagine, after Alex moved out." "I've learned to enjoy my own company," I said. "That's very independent of you," Richard chimed in. "Not everyone has the strength to live alone at your age. Many women your age are looking for security, someone to take care of them. It's only natural." The implication was clear. I was alone because I had failed to secure a man, failed to build the kind of life that would attract someone successful enough to provide for me. Alex shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His face was red, whether from embarrassment or anger, I couldn't tell. But he still didn't speak up. He just sat there letting them tear me down with polite words and poisonous implications. Chloe looked increasingly uncomfortable as well. She kept glancing at me, then at her parents, then down at her plate. I could see the conflict in her eyes. She wanted to say something, but years of training kept her silent. Good girls don't contradict their parents. Good girls keep quiet and let the adults talk. The main courses arrived. Richard had ordered the most expensive item on the menu for himself, the Wagyu beef with truffle butter priced at $200. Eleanor had the lobster. Chloe had the Chilean sea bass. Alex had ordered modestly the chicken breast, which was one of the less expensive options at $65. I had ordered the pasta primavera, the cheapest entree on the menu, at $38. It was a deliberate choice, playing my part perfectly. As we ate, Richard launched into a monologue about money and success. About how he had built his investment firm from the ground up, though I later learned from Alex that he had actually inherited it from his father. About the importance of financial security and planning for the future. About how fortunate Alex and Chloe were to have his support and guidance. "You know, Evelyn," he said, cutting into his steak with relish, "I was just telling Alex the other day about the wedding costs. We spared no expense, of course. $250,000, but Chloe deserved the best. The venue in the Hamptons, the flowers flown in from Amsterdam, the dress from Vera Wang. Only the best for our little girl." "I'm sure it was beautiful," I said, feeling a pang that I hadn't been there to see it. Alex had told me it was a small, intimate affair, that there wouldn't be room for everyone. Now I understood that I simply hadn't been deemed important enough to invite. "And the honeymoon," Eleanor added, her eyes gleaming. 2 weeks in Paris, staying at the Plaza Athénée. $50,000, but worth every penny to see them so happy. "That's very generous," I said, my voice steady, despite the anger building inside me. "We believe in taking care of family," Richard said, leaning back in his chair with satisfaction. "And we didn't stop there. We put down $50,000 as a down payment on a house for them. A proper house in Madison Park, one of Seattle's best neighborhoods. Can't have our Chloe living in some cramped apartment, can we? The house is worth $1.2 million, but with our down payment and co-signing the mortgage, they're all set. He paused, taking a sip of wine, clearly waiting for me to express amazement or gratitude. When I didn't, he continued. Of course, not everyone can afford to help their children in this way. Not everyone has the resources or the financial acumen to build the kind of wealth that allows for such generosity. But we believe it's our duty as parents to give our children every advantage. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Unlike some people. Unlike me. The failure of a mother who couldn't even afford to give her son a proper start in life. Eleanor nodded vigorously. We believe in investing in our children's future. We believe in helping family. She paused meaningfully, her eyes on me, her expression a calculated mixture of pity and superiority. We know that not everyone is as fortunate as we are. Some people have to struggle just to make ends meet. It's so hard these days, especially for women of a certain age living alone working those tedious office jobs. She said office jobs the way someone might say sewage worker or garbage collector, as if the work was dirty, shameful beneath proper people. I set down my fork carefully. I could feel something building inside me, a pressure that had been accumulating for the past hour, compressed by every condescending comment, every pitying look, every implication that I was less than. Is that so? I said quietly. Oh, yes, Eleanor continued, warming to her subject. She reached into her designer handbag, a Birkin that probably cost more than a car, and pulled out a thick envelope. She placed it on the table with a soft thud, then slid it across the white tablecloth toward me. The motion was deliberate, slow, designed to draw everyone's attention. The table fell silent. Even the ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to fade away. Alex stared at the envelope in horror. Chloe's eyes went wide. Richard watched with an expression of smug satisfaction. Evelyn, Eleanor said, her voice dripping with false kindness. We've been talking, Richard and I, and we want to help you too. You're family now, after all. We take care of our own. I looked at the envelope but didn't touch it. There's $1,000 in there, Eleanor continued, her voice taking on the tone of someone explaining something to a slow child. And we'd like to give you the same amount every month. For your expenses, to help you live more comfortably. We know how hard it must be living alone on a limited income. At your age, you shouldn't have to struggle. You should be able to retire to enjoy your golden years, not worrying about making rent or affording groceries. The words landed like slaps. Each sentence was carefully constructed to humiliate while maintaining a veneer of generosity. They were offering me charity. They were treating me like a poor relation who needed their help to survive. Richard leaned forward, his expression one of false concern. We just want to make sure you're taking care of Evelyn. Alex worries about you, you know. He's told us how hard you worked to raise him, how you sacrificed. But those days should be over. You shouldn't have to worry anymore. Let us help. Let us ease your burden. Alex looked like he wanted to die. His face was white, his hands trembling. I could see him warring with himself, wanting to speak up, but terrified of the consequences. Terrified of offending his in-laws, of causing a scene, of disrupting the careful peace he had negotiated. Chloe had tears in her eyes. She reached out and touched my hand. Evelyn, they mean well, she whispered. They just want to help. I looked down at her hand on mine. Her skin was soft, clearly well cared for. Her nails were perfectly manicured. She wore a diamond ring that had probably cost more than I pretended to make in a year. And she was trying to comfort me while her parents insulted me in the most degrading way possible. I reached out and picked up the envelope. I held it between my fingers, feeling its weight. $1,000. To them, it was nothing. Pocket change, a tip for good service. To the person they thought I was, it should have been life-changing. A month's rent, groceries for weeks. The difference between scraping by and living with a little comfort. I smiled slowly, then set the envelope back down on the table. That's very kind of you, I said, my voice soft and controlled. But I have a question, Richard. That $50,000 you mentioned, the down payment on Alex and Chloe's house. Yes. He looked confused, clearly not understanding where I was going with this. That's about what I make in... I paused as if calculating. The table was silent, everyone watching me. Even at nearby tables, I noticed people had stopped their conversations, sensing something was about to happen. Half a month. The confusion on their faces would have been comical if the situation weren't so serious. Eleanor's perfectly made-up face froze her smile, becoming a rictus. Richard's smug expression faltered, his eyes narrowing as if he wasn't sure he had heard correctly. Chloe's hand tightened on mine, her eyes going wide. Alex went completely white, his mouth falling open. "I'm sorry, what?" Richard said, his voice losing some of its smoothness. I sat up straighter, and in that moment I let the mask slip completely. I let them see the woman I really was. The woman who had faced down hostile takeovers and won. The woman who had negotiated billion-dollar deals. The woman who had built an empire from nothing but determination and brilliance. The woman who commanded respect in boardrooms around the world. "I said that's about what I make in half a month," I repeated clearly, my voice carrying across our table. "Actually, I was being conservative. It's closer to 2 weeks when you factor in stock options and performance bonuses." The color drained from Eleanor's face. Richard's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. At nearby tables, people had definitely stopped eating, now their attention fixed on our table. I continued, my voice steady and cold. "You asked what I do, Eleanor. I am the CEO and founder of Apex Solutions. Perhaps you've heard of it. We're one of the largest technology companies in the Pacific Northwest. We operate in 32 countries with an annual revenue of $5 billion. I employ 20,000 people worldwide. We were just featured in Forbes and Fortune. Last month, we closed a merger worth $2.3 billion. I paused, letting that sink in. The silence at our table was deafening. "Your down payment on my son's house, Richard, the $50,000 you're so proud of, I make that in approximately 2 weeks. The $250,000 you spent on the wedding, that's about 1 month's income for me. Your beach house in the Hamptons that you were bragging about, I could buy it for cash tomorrow without significantly impacting my net worth." Richard's face had gone from pale to red, a vein pulsing in his temple. Eleanor looked like she might faint, her hand clutching at her pearl necklace. "In fact," I continued, my voice taking on an almost conversational tone, "my net worth is somewhere in the neighborhood of $800 million. I have homes in Seattle, San Francisco, and Tokyo. I sit on the boards of 3 major corporations and 2 charitable foundations. I was named one of the most influential women in technology by Time magazine last year." I reached into my small handbag and pulled out my black American Express Centurion card, the one that required spending at least $250,000 a year to maintain. I placed it on the table with a soft click right next to their envelope of charity money. "I drive an old car and wear simple clothes because I choose to, not because I have to. I learned a long time ago through very hard experience that the true measure of a person isn't what they wear or what they drive or how much money they have in the bank. It's how they treat people, especially how they treat people they think can't do anything for them." I picked up the envelope and held it up. "This what you tried to do here tonight. This is what I wanted to see. I wanted to know what kind of people my son had married into. I wanted to see how you would treat someone you perceived as beneath you, someone you thought was poor, someone you thought was struggling." I stood up, and the entire restaurant seemed to be watching now. Even the waiters had stopped moving, frozen in place by the drama unfolding at our table. "And you showed me exactly who you are. You're people who measure worth by bank accounts and designer labels. You're people who think money gives you the right to look down on others. You're people who offer charity not out of genuine kindness, but to establish dominance, to make yourselves feel superior." I looked at Alex, really looked at him, and saw the tears streaming down his face. My heart broke for him, but he needed to see this. He needed to understand what I was trying to teach him. "This dinner is on me," I said, gesturing to the table with my credit card still in hand. "Consider it a small lesson in not judging books by their covers. And perhaps in the future you might want to think twice before offering charity to someone you know nothing about. You might want to consider treating all people with respect, regardless of their appearance or perceived social status, because you never know who you're actually talking to." I turned to the sommelier who was standing nearby with her mouth slightly open. "Please bring me the wine list. I'd like to order something special for the table. The 1990 Chateau Petrus, I think. They should have at least 1 bottle left." The sommelier's eyes widened. The 1990 Chateau Petrus was one of the most expensive wines in the restaurant, priced at $8,000 a bottle, more than 10 times what Richard had spent on his Dom Perignon. "Right away, Ms. Reed," she said, and I saw the moment of recognition in her eyes. She knew who I was. Of course she did. I had been here dozens of times, had probably spent $250,000 in this restaurant over the years. I looked at Alex one more time. "I love you, son," I said softly. "But you need to decide who you want to be. A man who is ashamed of his mother, a man who hides the truth to avoid conflict, or a man who stands up for what's right, who values people for who they are rather than what they have. That choice is yours to make." I walked out of the Zenith with my head high, leaving behind a table of stunned silence, one very expensive unpaid bill, and an $8,000 bottle of wine that was about to be delivered. Let them enjoy it. Let them think about what it cost every time they took a sip. Let them remember this night every time they felt tempted to judge someone based on appearance. The valet brought my Honda around his attitude completely different now. He had been watching from inside, had seen the commotion, had probably heard from the other staff what had just happened. He opened my car door with a respect that bordered on reverence. "Have a good evening, Ms. Reed," he said. I tipped him $100 and drove home through the rainy Seattle streets, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The drive to my real home, the penthouse apartment overlooking Elliott Bay, was a blur of streetlights and rain. I barely remembered parking in my private garage, barely remembered taking the private elevator up to my floor. But once I was inside, once the door was closed and locked behind me, I finally let myself feel everything I had been holding back. I stood in my living room, surrounded by all the trappings of the success I had worked so hard to achieve. The view of the water through floor-to-ceiling windows, the original artwork on the walls, including a small Monet that I had purchased at auction, the furniture that was beautiful and comfortable and expensive, the shelves lined with books and awards and photographs of Alex growing up. And I felt empty. I had just done something that could be seen as cruel. I had publicly humiliated my son's in-laws. I had exposed their prejudice and their cruelty. Yes, but I had also made enemies of the people my son would have to deal with for the rest of his life. Had I gone too far? Had my anger and my hurt made me act in a way that would ultimately hurt Alex more than help him? My phone was ringing. I looked at the screen and saw David's name. I answered. "It's all over social media already," he said without preamble. "Someone at the restaurant recorded part of it on their phone. The video is going viral. Don't judge the book is trending." "Evelyn, what happened?" I told him everything. About the dinner, about the envelope of charity money, about my decision to reveal the truth, about walking out and leaving them with an $8,000 bottle of wine and a lesson they would never forget. David was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "You know, this means you can't hide anymore, right? This is out there now. By tomorrow morning, everyone will know who you are. The press will be calling. Your competitors will be watching. Your employees will have questions." "I know," I said quietly. "And Alex?" "I don't know. I hope he understands. I hope he sees what I was trying to show him. But I might have just destroyed any chance I had of having a relationship with him and Chloe." "Or," David said thoughtfully, "you might have just given him the wake-up call he needed. Sometimes love means letting people see the hard truths, even if it hurts, especially if it hurts." After we hung up, I sat in the darkness watching the lights of the city reflected on the water. My phone kept buzzing with notifications, text messages from colleagues who had seen the video, emails from reporters requesting interviews, alerts from my security team about increased activity outside my building, but nothing from Alex. Sunday passed in a haze. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I kept replaying the evening in my mind, seeing the look on Alex's face, the tears in Chloe's eyes, the shock and humiliation on Richard and Eleanor's faces. I kept wondering if I had made a terrible mistake. David came by in the morning with coffee and croissants from my favorite bakery, the one I never went to in person because people might recognize me. We sat in my living room and planned the press conference. "We need to control the narrative," David said, scrolling through his tablet. "The video is everywhere, but it's out of context. People are making assumptions. Some are calling you a hero. Others are saying you were cruel. We need to tell your side of the story. We need to explain why you did what you did." "I don't want to trash Alex's in-laws," I said. Despite everything, they're still going to be part of his life. Then we focus on you, David said. On your journey. On the choices you made to hide your success and why. On the lesson you learned about authenticity. We make this about standing in your truth, not about their behavior. We worked all day Sunday crafting the perfect message. We would announce the billion-dollar education initiative, a project I had been planning for years. We would talk about my background about being a single mother who built a company from nothing. We would discuss the importance of not judging people by their appearance, of treating everyone with respect, regardless of their perceived status. But we wouldn't mention the Sterlings by name. We wouldn't trash them publicly. That would only make me look petty and would hurt Alex more in the long run. Monday morning, I woke up at 5. I went to my real closet and spent an hour selecting the perfect outfit. Not too flashy, not too modest. Something that said I was powerful but approachable. Successful but not arrogant. I chose an Armani pantsuit in deep charcoal gray paired with a silk blouse in cream. Understated jewelry, nothing too flashy. Professional but elegant. When I looked in the mirror, I saw the woman I really was. Not the simple woman in the cheap dress. Not the powerful CEO in intimidating designer clothes. Just me, Evelyn Reed. All of me no longer hiding. The press conference was held in the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Olympic Hotel. David had worked his magic. Every major news outlet in the Pacific Northwest was there. Tech journalists from Silicon Valley. Business reporters from New York and London. The room was packed with cameras and reporters and curious onlookers. I stood backstage waiting for my cue and felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. This was right. This was necessary. For 30 years, I had hidden who I was afraid of being judged, afraid of being seen as someone who cared too much about money or success. But in hiding, I had inadvertently taught my son to be ashamed. I had taught him that success was something to conceal, that power was something to apologize for. No more. The conference coordinator gave me the signal. I walked out onto the stage, and the flash of cameras began immediately. I took my place at the podium, gripped the edges, and smiled at the sea of faces before me. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice strong and clear. Thank you for coming today. And I told them everything. So here's what I want to leave you with. True power isn't about what you show off. It's about what you protect. Your values, your integrity, your sense of self. And real worth doesn't need to be proven with money or status. It simply is. Have you ever hidden parts of yourself to make others comfortable? Have you ever been judged based on appearances? Drop a comment below and share your story. And if this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about standing in your truth and refusing to be diminished. Your support means the world, and I read every single comment. Until next time, remember this: never let anyone make you feel small for being exactly who you are.